Hi, this is Matt Williams, writer on The Cosby Show, creator of Roseanne and Home Improvement, and I am doing this interview with Elaine Goodman on Gogoodman.com.au.
I'm going to treat you like any comedian or comedy writer I've interviewed before because most of your career has been revolved around comedy. What's the earliest memory you have of comedy having an effect on you?
You know, I think I discovered it, believe it or not, when I was around 5 years old with my grandmother. And she was a very loving, nurturing woman, and I would do goofy things to make her laugh. And my favorite thing of all, if I did a pratfall or I did a funny face or I imitated someone, my grandmother would laugh so hard she would actually get tears in her eyes, and she would wipe away tears. And I remember as young as 5 thinking, oh, this is kind of cool. Making people laugh and really truly laughing, and the release that gives. I didn't intellectualize it, of course. It was just a response that this was kind of fun. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it's growing up in Indiana or my background, I don't know. I just tend to look at the world and find the funny. Even in the midst of an argument with my wife, there's always that part of my brain that's going, oh, I can use that. Oh, that's good. And it's always been there.
And from the people that I've interviewed before that are in comedy television, that they've said even the arguments with your wife, it's all material for a TV show. You've got to note it all down. You've got to take notes.
Well, I can't tell you how many times on Home Improvement, every time my wife and I had an argument, it became an episode. Even to the point that I had forgotten a conversation that we had had at the breakfast table. And weeks later, she came to see a taping, and I went, oh, God. I said, honey, some of this may sound familiar. And it was almost word for word our conversation at the breakfast table. But that's the best comedy. You draw from life. You take what's real and exaggerate. That's the one thing I learned on The Cosby Show. Bill always said, take what's truthful, take what's real, and exaggerate. And I applied that to all the shows.
If we go back to your earliest memory for a minute, some comedians I interview, they say watching a certain comedian or seeing a certain show or listening to a certain broadcast, but there are the odd few that have an actual moment in their life where they relate being funny to laughing and gradually figure out how to do it on a more regular basis. So from the age of 5 years old, did you start to figure out how to make different people laugh? And how to adapt your kind of style, if you were starting to get a style back then gradually through your teens, and how to adapt it for different audiences?
Well, you know, I never thought of myself as funny or a comedian. I was trained as an actor and a director, and I started writing to have something to direct because I couldn't afford royalties. So through childhood, I had no interest in show business, the theater. It wasn't until high school I got involved. And then as I started evolving from actor, director into writer, I just found that almost everything I wrote was comedic. And I would say some of that was early television as a young child watching in black and white I Love Lucy, watching Jack Benny, shows like that. And especially I Love Lucy as a young child, because she was so accessible, because she was physical, she was funny. So she had a major influence. And then I just have a funny family. They're all crazy as hell, but they're funny, and they're all great storytellers. And I think just part of the family dynamic was to top everyone else's story and be funnier than the other person at the table. So, in a weird way, sitting around the table, quote, telling lies, it was kind of a precursor to sitting in a writer's room with a bunch of comedy writers, because you're all trying to find the funny. I don't think you can teach, by the way, anyone to be funny. I teach students. You can teach them to hone their skills, develop their craft, but I don't think you can teach someone to be funny. Either God bunks you on the head with a comedy stick or he doesn't. And I do believe comedians are born. I don't think they're trained or made.
Do you believe you can teach timing?
You can teach the structure of a joke. You can teach some degree of timing. But the really great comedians, they just think funny. And that thought process registers. Thoughts create energy, thoughts or things. When you think, that creates energy. And Cosby or Tim Allen, Roseanne, especially Tim and Bill, they just would think funny. Bill could look at Rudy and not say a word, and the audience would start laughing because they knew he had an extreme attitude, and you watch him think. And that, when I'm teaching young writers, I always say, yes, the jokes are important, but what's more important is people buy a ticket or turn on their TV to watch the characters think. And I think that's the key of great comedians. They think funny.
Yeah, you mentioned, we're skipping way ahead here, but we'll come back to the interview in a sec. You mentioned Bill Cosby could just get a laugh by looking at someone, and that's something. The other sitcom creator that I've interviewed is Phil Rosenthal, who created Everybody Loves Raymond, and he says the one thing that really isn't around today is the art of silence in today's sitcoms. Every joke that comes up, it's because of a line. It's not just because of a facial expression or because of comedic silence. It's not a tool that's really used anymore as much as it was in the 80s and 90s.
I was known on all the shows I worked on as the joke buster because I learned writing television on the Cosby Show. Bill would throw out anything that sounded like a joke. If it was a 1-2 punch, Bada Bing type joke, he would strip it out. So what I learned was attitude, extreme attitude, relationship, being emphatic and extreme in what you want or being frustrated is funny. And I never embraced the notion of 3 jokes a page, because you could read some of our scripts for several pages and there wasn't a hard joke. And it's really, we call it sitcoms, but it's really behavior comms. You can create situations, yes, but really what you are watching as a viewer is behavior. And that's what's funny, and that's what's captivating.
Now, we better move on with the interview because we don't want to be here for 4 hours. I could talk to you all day, Matt, but let's keep moving forward.
Okay.
When did working on TV become a realistic aim for you? Were you always interested in TV or in entertainment?
I was not. I was not interested in TV at all. I was more interested in theater. That was all my training, and I was supporting myself as an actor and kind of supporting myself as a director. And as I said, I started writing plays, and some one-act plays that I had written. One of them won a one-act festival and was published. Those plays ended up at the Cosby Show, and they called me in based on those one-act plays. And so my first interview was at the Cosby Show, and I'd never had aspirations to create sitcoms. My only aspiration was to make enough money to feed myself and to continue to do what I like. But I never sat out and said, "Oh, I want to do this specific sitcom world." That's not my goal in life. And then I discovered the Cosby Show, and I went, "Whoa!" I slid in there, not knowing anything about what I was doing, and I realized, oh, I'm pretty good at this. My mind works, and the way I'm organized works for sitcoms.
So, the first email that I sent you, I told you about the book that I'm reading, written by Warren Littlefield, and it's all about the era of must-see television on NBC. It's called Top of the Rock. And as you mentioned, your first TV writing job was writing for The Cosby Show, which was the start of that must-see TV era in about 1982. I think you got hired in about 83 or 84, and you were already an accomplished theatre writer. Can you tell me a bit about the culture of NBC right at the start of that period? Because the Cosby Show came around around the same time as Cheers, and that just changed the whole face of television in America and all around the world as well.
Well, if I remember correctly, and I think it should be in Warren's book, and I know Warren very well, the sitcom was dead. The number one show on television was Magnum P.I. Everyone basically said the sitcom was gone. It was passé. And then The Cosby Show came along, and you can check me on this. I believe it premiered opposite Magnum P.I. And, of course, it became an instant success, went through the roof, was number one show, I don't know how many years. And that revitalized in the 80s and all the way through the 90s for about 15 years. It just created this wave of, quote, classic sitcoms. And I think the one common denominator in the must-see TV era was you just had characters that you liked and you wanted to spend time with. You felt you knew Sam Malone. You wanted to be in part of the family in Family Ties. You wanted to be a part of The Cosby Show. And that was very conscious with Roseanne and Home Improvement, knowing we were inviting the audience into their lives so you could be a part of their lives and they could be a part of your lives for a half an hour. So I think that truly was an extraordinary era because, obviously, the success that NBC had during that period.
And did you stay there till the end of The Cosby Show before you moved to ABC?
No, I was there for 3 years. I came in right when the show premiered. I think Bill fired most of the staff. He didn't like the writing. He didn't like the jokey writing. And I think I was hired out of I know I was hired out of desperation. And I stayed with The Cosby Show for 3.5 years. The first 3 years of the series, then with John Marcus and Carmen Finestra, we took Bill's idea and we developed A Different World. And then we launched that. And then after 3.5 years, the fourth year of Cosby, I was working and writing scripts, but I was developing the Roseanne pilot. And that took off pretty quickly. So I was actually on Cosby about 3.5 years.
So then moving from a theatre background, which wouldn't have as much money in it as TV does, to moving to TV, which gradually started building up to like earning billions and billions and billions of dollars, is that something that you saw happen, or were you just involved in the writing side of it and you didn't really get to experience the kind of hype surrounding even Bill Cosby at the time?
I was not aware. You go into this field of work because you love doing it. I remember moving to New York, and at the time, this was in the late 70s, thinking, if I can make $150 a week doing theater, I'll be happy the rest of my life. And, of course, you get into TV, and especially when it's extraordinary television that becomes a huge hit, the money is astronomical. But I never went into it thinking, I'm going to make a lot of money. It happened, thank God, but that was never the intention. And I always approached television as if I was writing a half-hour, one-act play every week. I never thought of it as a sitcom. I always thought of it as a one-act play with the same characters and pretty much the same sets every week. And I think that was one of the keys to my success, is because I really didn't conceive of the high-concept television show. I just was fascinated with behavior. I wrote people, and that's what people relate to. That's what the audience relates to. And the next part is, before we talk a bit about Roseanne, I've got a couple of questions about that show. Moving to ABC after NBC rejected Roseanne, you took it to ABC and they bought it. And that was when NBC was starting to pick up a lot of traction and a lot of power in the TV wars. Was it hard to move away from that and move to the opposition? No, not really, because to be completely honest, you are so myopic. It's like being a coal miner. You are so deep in the tunnel when you are in production. You are just trying to survive and trying to stay ahead with the scripts, and you're beating out this episode, and you're shooting this one, and you're editing that one, that you are so busy you don't really have time to talk to the network that much or to even confer with them. And we also had the buffer of Tom Warner and Marcy Carsey, who handled the network. Although I must say on The Cosby Show, we never got notes. We never had network executives coming around giving us notes. we were free to do whatever Bill and the writing team wanted to do.
Marcy Carsey, she
But
gets a lot of...
conceptually, going from NBC to ABC, it really didn't make any difference. The only thing that mattered was the network truly excited about the show, which meant, would they stand behind it? Would they spend money on promotion? Would they protect it creatively? So regardless of which network it was, are they truly passionate about this project? That was the only important thing to me.
Marcy Carsey, she gets quoted a lot in Warren's book, and I swear she has the best name I've ever heard in television. So, you, as you mentioned, you originally created the sitcom Roseanne with Roseanne Barr, and I read you studied her life and her stand-up for hours and hours in order to capture her life. You even spent a lot of time at her home. You ended up leaving that show after one season because of creative differences with Roseanne. But take me back to the beginning. But take it back to the beginning. In the book I'm reading at the moment, NBC originally turned down Roseanne for a sitcom. Did you know much about her? Because I think she was helped a lot. She was one of the comedians that was helped a lot by Rodney Dangerfield in her early career.
I did not know her at all. In fact, when I was on the Cosby Show, Tom Warner and Marcy Carsey knew that I wanted to create my own series. I knew that I wanted to do movies and other things because I was expanding, and I really wanted to do something of my own. So the original concept for Roseanne did not involve her at all. The pitch was 3 working-class women in the Midwest, where I grew up, 1 married with kids, 1 divorced with a kid, and 1 single. And the focus of the show were the 3 women who were Roseanne, her sister, and Crystal. And that was the focus of the show. And then when John Goodman came along and his extraordinary talent, and we saw him read with Roseanne, Tom and Marcy and I all looked at each other and they said, "There's your show." So what happened is, when I pitched it, they said, for the married woman with kids, we have a comedian we really like and would like to build a show around her. So what happened was the concept was working-class women in a factory in the Midwest. Roseanne was the first person to be cast. And then when I was writing the pilot, they kept encouraging, it's got to be from her point of view. So I went back, watched her stand up, went to her house, talked to her about her life. And so the whole concept got skewered through her point of view. And, I give her credit. I didn't come up with Domestic Goddess. That was hers. But the world and the characters and the Midwestern sensibility and the working class is very much how I grew up, and that came from me.
And you left that show after one season due to creative differences with Roseanne. From what I've read, especially...
Well, it wasn't creative differences as much as a power play. She's a difficult person. Public record will attest to that. And basically, she wanted more control over the show. And as the show's creator and the executive producer, I could control over the show. So after 13 episodes and the show hits number 1, she basically says, it's him or me. Well, who's the star of the show? Roseanne. They're not turning in to see me or my name on the screen. So Carsey Werner, they're honorable people, and they honored my contract, and I left and then went to Disney and then signed a deal at Disney and was there for 10 years. So in many ways, it worked out perfectly.
Right. I couldn't find any information about your time at Disney, but we can work on that. So from what I've read, especially when the show is based around an actor, as you mentioned, quite a few writers lose their jobs after speaking up against a star, and that happened at the Cosby Show as well, with different people that I've read about. Am I right in saying, I think I heard you say in an interview or read something about you saying writers need to be more respected and less disposable? Is this still prevalent in today's big shows?
Well, I think here's the task the writer faces when you're building a show around a stand-up comedian. The writer is damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you capture their voice perfectly and incorporate their stand-up and you capture their rhythms and the persona they've created in stand-up, well, then you're damned, because all you did was take their stand-up, right? And if you don't write according to their rhythms and their persona, well, then you couldn't write the character. So you're kind of damned if you do or damned if you don't. What I learned very early on Cosby and applied to Roseanne and to Home Improvement was, your star's important, but those people around your star is what really makes the star shine. Bill wouldn't be that funny without Theo. Roseanne wouldn't be nearly as funny without John Goodman, without Dan. Tim would not be nearly as funny without Pat. So it was orchestrating the characters, and that's really one of the keys for a long-term sitcom. Look at Cheers. Look at Friends. You orchestrate your characters, and when you have a strong point of view character, Roseanne, Tim Allen, Bill Cosby, you have to make sure you have the right constellation of stars swirling around your star in order for it to work.
I guess that's even the same with Seinfeld and Everybody Loves Raymond. They had one star, but they had really, really good actors, especially in Everybody Loves Raymond. Well, even in Seinfeld as well, they had really great actors surrounding that star, and he could work off them, and they could work off him.
And that way the star is not carrying everything. Really smart comedians know if the people around them are funny, they're going to be funny. It goes back to that famous story of Jack Benny, who would give away jokes to the other characters, and he could just stand there and be funny. And he knew he had to have Rochester. He had to have these other characters around him. And so I think Everybody Loves Raymond is a perfect example. Can you imagine the show without that mother or without the wife? You need those characters around to rub up against and bump into your star. Then there's that ineffable thing called chemistry that you can't write. Either it happens or it doesn't. And that's a gift from the TV gods.
Yeah, and in the book that I'm reading, it happened a lot, and it all seems like luck. Like in Friends, Marta Kaufman and David Crane, they pretty much knew who they wanted to go after, and they were pretty lucky to get all 6 of them. Like there's these creators that know exactly who they want, but then there's these shows that the actors just fall into them, and it works out perfectly.
Yes, and that's again, that's fortuitous when you have that kind of chemistry. And when we get to Home Improvement, I can talk about that, because we went through several cast changes, and it ended up for the best.
Now, tell me about, you've worked with, as we mentioned, quite a few leading comedians. Can you tell me the differences between Tim Allen, Roseanne, and Bill Cosby as leading actors? I know Bill Cosby liked having a lot of creative control, and we've mentioned Roseanne as well. You clashed quite a bit, and she gave you an ultimatum. But I read that you and Tim Allen got on quite well. So what are some of your main differences between the 3 big comedic actors that you've worked with? And you've worked with a few others as well, but they're the 3 big ones that stand out.
Well, Bill had how many years of experience in TV going back to I Spy? Bill had decades of stand-up comedy. The show was inspired by his last big stand-up about the family that Michael Leeson and others took and turned into the series. So Bill knew exactly, with Tom and Marcy's help, what he wanted to say. So with the Cosby Show, all those decades in television and stand-up, he was the dictator. What he said went. With Roseanne, she had not acted. She had done stand-up, but she had never acted. She did not have that kind of experience. She needed to be protected. And by that I mean surrounded with Laurie Metcalf and John Goodman, these extraordinary actors who make her better. But she could not have creative control because she hadn't earned it the way Bill had. And besides, the show was conceived as an ensemble and transformed into a star vehicle in the process. So she's funny. She is a very funny lady, and she's a very smart lady. But when we started the pilot, she had virtually no acting experience. So that proved difficult. So we had to write scripts and shoot around that. Tim Allen had years of stand-up and had created this very strong persona. And with Tim early on, we had a face-to-face. I clicked with him instantly. I liked him. He's from the Midwest. He was married. We talked about our childhood. And early on, I sat with Tim and I said, look, this is how it has to work. I will respect your point of view. I want to hear every note you have. But at the end of the day, myself, David, or Carmen, the other two creators of the show, we have to control the show and have the final say, or else the show will not run smoothly. Tim looked at me and said, got it, let's do it. Not a problem. The entire run of the show, there was not a single problem. We had the same crew through every year because no one wanted to leave the show because the environment was so positive.
Obviously, on a sitcom, as you mentioned, and as Bill Cosby told you as well, you have to exaggerate anything that happens in order to make it funny. How did you know or figure out where that limit was? Was it different for each show?
It is. I think the most ineffable part of the process of comedy is tone. How broad, how exaggerated is the comedy, how rooted in reality. And there are certain shows that I do not find funny because the cast is ironically detached and they're commenting on the action as opposed to being engaged and in the moment. And again, because of my theater training, I always started with, okay, what's real? What does the character want? What is this character's greatest desire? What's their greatest fear? And examining the relationship. So everything came out of this verisimilitude, this lifelike situation. Broader, wackier, that has to be established in the pilot. Now, shows do change. But a show like Married with Children, which was far broader and more exaggerated than Home Improvement or Cosby, is a good example where it was really exaggerated and the tone was much broader. And that's what has to be determined up front in development and with the pilot, or that's where you get off track, especially with the network.
So is it easy, for example, say with Home Improvement, you said Tim Allen, he already had a persona from his stand-up career. Was it easier because he had that persona already and you could work on the exaggeration around that persona? Yeah,
yes. And what we did, David and Carmen and I set out, we said we want to write a family sitcom that celebrates a father and, more importantly, celebrates a marriage. And what we wanted to do on Home Improvement was just kind of celebrate this average American family who has this loving father who's a bit of a goof, but a loving father at the center. Tim Allen comes along, more power, that's great. He's got an extreme point of view, more power, masculinism, blah, 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 right? And all the grin. Well, as soon as you have that, now this goes back to orchestrating your cast. You need a foil for that. You need a strong woman who's going to match him. Then you have to surround him. We put 3 boys. The network kept saying it can't be 3 boys. You have to have a cute little girl. We said, no, it's got to be 3 boys because we want Jill outnumbered and outgunned. In this household, Tim's trying to raise these 3 boys to be wild men who dance in the woods and naked and howl at the moon. She's trying to raise 3 future husbands. So you see right there, you have ongoing conflict, points of view. And then the Iron John phase was going. There was the whole masculinism movement. So we said every man needs a mentor. Every man needs a man to teach him how to be a man, whether that's your father, a coach, an uncle, a cousin. So we created Wilson. So all of that, we took Tim's persona, but then we wrapped it with all these characters, and we found as many ways as possible to activate Tim's point of view, at work and at home.
Wow, and the choice of making Wilson this kind of mysterious character. If you look back at all these great sitcoms, most of them have that one secret, whether it's Chandler Bing's job or whether on Seinfeld it was the face of George's boss, or there's all these sitcoms that have these secrets. Was that, I guess, your secret, what Wilson looked like?
Well, it actually started, we knew we wanted a character who would serve as Tim's mentor. But Tim, one day in passing, said, I've got this neighbor. He said, it's the damnedest thing in Michigan. He said, every time I see him, he's standing at the fence and he waves, hey, Tim, and he talks to me, but I never see his face. And we all started laughing. And we all looked at each other, and Tim said, yeah, that's my neighbor. And we all agreed, let's do that. And, of course, Disney, who was producing the show, the studio, said, you can't keep him behind that fence. And one executive said, after 3 episodes, you're going to have to show his face. And we said, no, we think this will work and it'll be intriguing. And so for the whole life of the series, of course, then it got to really be a gimmick of how many different ways we could disguise his face. But we wanted him to be that mysterious mentor, that guiding force in Tim's life.
When you're in that stage where you've got to kind of chat with and compromise with the studios you're working with, is that a matter of being confident and holding your ground, or is that a matter of just going with your gut, or is it complete luck that it all worked out because you stuck to your guns?
I think if you're just being defensive for the sake of being defensive, or if it's coming purely from ego or wanting to, quote, win, it's going to be a train wreck. If you present the reasons why, and if you've really thought out all the reasons why you want to do this, 90% of the time the network will go, okay, we hear you, we get it, let's give it a try. And, of course, once it worked, then they begin to trust you with other things. But I think also that was a different time in TV. You know, I think television wasn't as micromanaged as it is now. And the corporate noting system that occurs now wasn't as, it was there, but it was one executive giving you notes, not a team of executives or, a battalion of executives giving you multiple pages of notes on every script. It was 2 or 3 notes an episode, and we took it. We listened. We respected their notes. I always want notes. But at the end of the day, you have to do what's right in your gut. You're creating the show. It's coming out of your head and heart. You have to stay true to that. You can't abandon that.
And you mentioned you were creating it for Disney. I thought Home Improvement was on ABC. So at what stage did you go to Disney and spend 10 years there? What else did you work on there before we get back?
It was on ABC, but Disney was the studio. I signed a deal with Disney and was on the lot for 10 years to create series. And the second show I created under that Disney deal was Home Improvement.
Right. Okay. So now,
but ABC was the studio.
An interesting thing that I've found from interviewing people, I interviewed Richard Kahn last year as well and asked him this too. Do you think Home Improvement wasn't as respected by the critics as the other, as the other two family sitcoms that you worked on? It's never mentioned in the big.
Oh, I know it wasn't.
Yeah,
it wasn't. There was disdain from the press, and when we first premiered, the reviews were scathing. They condemned it. I think the New York Times said, "How can this show last? You can't blow up a toaster every week," or something like that. And to this day, I don't think it's respected, but it doesn't matter because it was one of the most popular shows in the history of television and traveled all around the world. It was, as you know, a huge hit in Australia, Germany, throughout the world. It was a massive hit. And what most people don't realize, Seinfeld's a great show. It's a wonderful show. But when it was put up against Home Improvement, we crushed it in the ratings. You can look all of this up. It was crushed in the ratings. And NBC was forced to move it from our time slot, I think it was then, to Tuesday night. They moved it to another night where it took off and became its own hit. So something that is that popular, there is a tendency by the critics to dismiss it. And I think this show was dismissed. I'm not bitter about it. I don't have any bad feelings, but I think the reality is it was dismissed by most critical minds.
The theory I kind of have is, do you think it had anything to do with that it wasn't based around sexual chemistry like Friends was, like Seinfeld was? It was more based around just plain slapstick humor, like blowing up a toaster. And there weren't many sitcoms like that at the time because they all had casts that were based around the sexual chemistry of the characters that weren't related. Do you think that has anything to do with it, that you went a different way and that you had kids?
I think Tim was a man who worked with tools and worked with his hands. I think this is a man who celebrated tools and building a patio. This was not, quote, sophisticated humor. But I challenge those who would dismiss the show because the Wilson scenes, there was smart writing there. But it wasn't as glib as some shows, too. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, especially critics, mistake glibness for intelligence or sophistication.
Glib.
And we weren't glib. We were going for the big joke. We wanted people to laugh hard. And so, yes, some of those gags were straight slapstick on Tool Time, and they were shot brilliantly by John Pasquin. And there was no apologies for that. We wanted the audience to really laugh and enjoy. And we wanted the audience to be a family audience. So from the 6-year-old to the 66-year-old grandparents, you could all sit and watch this show and enjoy it.
And that's the
that was a deliberate choice.
That's the interesting thing. As you mentioned, it was crazy big around the world. And Richard Kahn, even when he came to Australia, he said he got mobbed by people, and he said it won the People's Choice Awards every year, but never picked up an Emmy. It's just like, why?
No.
Yeah, for some reason the critics, the people that don't really matter, didn't like it, but the people that mattered, the general public, the population of the world loved it. Does that add up to you?
Well, I think it's fairly common when you look now. If it's dark, esoteric, or dysfunctional, then it's really cool. If it's big and popular and it appeals to a wide swatch of the public, then the tendency is to dismiss it. It's just popular entertainment. Well, I will take popular entertainment anytime.
Now, I want to touch on a couple of cameos as well, and as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of comedy. Like, a lot of the legends, I've looked up their stuff, I've studied them, I've read about them, and Tim Allen has contacts, and he obviously had contacts when he came to Home Improvement as well. You had Jay Leno on the show once or twice, and you also had Rodney Dangerfield as well. Do you remember anything about those weeks that you filmed with those two guys?
Not really. We had so many guest stars, from country western stars to international race car drivers to George Foreman to all, and we had so many, because everyone wanted to do the show. And to be honest, I don't have any stories about that. I know he and Jay had this friendly rivalry because they both collect cars, and they're both car addicts, and so I know they were always competing with each other, but
I think they still
I really
are.
don't have any anecdotes.
I think they still
I'm
are.
sure they are.
Have you ever had a job offer to write on Last Man Standing, to work alongside Tim again?
Yes, yeah, I did. I did, and I very consciously chose not to. Not because of Tim. I adore Tim Allen. I have great respect for him. But I knew the pressure would be to create another Home Improvement, and that would be impossible. The expectations would be that the show would be Home Improvement 2. And besides that, my life is in New York. I was out here working in TV, but my wife, my kids were in New York, and I wanted to get back to New York and get back to doing some theater. So that's what I'm doing.
Now, you mentioned you wanted to talk a little bit about the cast and the changeover as well. Pamela Anderson was replaced by Deb Dunning, I think, after one season, and you also did the last season without Jonathan Taylor-Thomas. Is it hard to work into those kind of situations when things happen suddenly?
No, once the show is up and running, you can mix and match cast, and that's not the issue. It was during the filming of the actual pilot, because the lady cast as Jill originally was Frances Fisher. Brilliant actress, wonderful person. And she and Tim, we rehearsed for 5 days, and it just wasn't working. And rightfully so. And that one of the Disney executives said, this isn't working. We have a woman whose pilot just failed. She just gave birth to twins. She's a funny actor. We think she would be a great match with Tim. We released Frances Fisher, brought in Pat Richardson. She came in, rehearsed the first part of the day. This is 2 days before we shot the pilot. Plugged her in. The show exploded. We had a 5-minute laugh spread from the time she entered the cast. Frances Fisher is a brilliant actor, but there wasn't the right chemistry with Tim. Pat came in, and she challenged him, and it sparkled. I mean, it crackled. So we knew we had lightning in a bottle.
And
the original... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, even after just 2 days of rehearsals.
In the first half day of rehearsal, we knew.
Wow.
It was that intangible thing. You could feel it, and it was funny. And she was strong and sassy, and she confronted Tim and made Tim kind of sit back on his heels. And all of a sudden you went, okay, there's chemistry, okay? You can't write that. You can't create that. That is right there in front of you. So that worked. The original actor we had for Wilson, John Bedford Lloyd. We met with him. We cast him. We explained to him, you're going to be behind the fence. He said he had no problem. We sent him the script. He had a bit of a reaction and said, what do you mean I'm standing behind the fence every episode? And we said, we explained that. And he said, no, thank you. So we were like a day or two away from starting the pilot, so we scrambled and went back through all of our audition tapes, and we said, we really like this guy's voice. Let's get him out here. It was Earl Hindman. The original Al.
Yeah.
Stephen Tobolowsky.
This is what Richard told me about. His name was Glenn as well in the pilot, and that all changed after the first episode.
Yes. And then Stephen decided he's got a movie career and didn't want to do TV, and I had worked with Richard Karn at a writers' conference, and we called him in, and we told him, it's only going to be for the pilot, you understand? Fine. And we said, it's only going to be for the first 2 episodes.
And you're only going to be sweeping
fine.
in the background. You're not going to be saying anything, just sweeping in the background.
Sweeping in the background. He said, that's fine. By the 3rd episode, you watched him. When Tim would say something and Richard Karn would turn and look at Tim, people would start laughing. And we go, okay. So that's three examples where we recast immediately before or during the pilot, and the chemistry between Tim and Earl, Tim and Pat, and Tim and Richard, that is really what made the show.
You've been involved in 3 of the biggest family-based sitcoms of all time, The Cosby Show, Roseanne and Home Improvement. What do you like about that format as opposed to shows like Friends and Seinfeld and even The Big Bang Theory, as I mentioned, that are friends, that are all friends-based and have a lot more sexual chemistry to them rather than just like interaction as family? What do you like about that format?
Well, I can answer you conceptually, and I can answer you personally. Conceptually, what I like about the family sitcom, we've all got a family, right? And the goal when you write a family sitcom is to have the audience at home, regardless of race, creed, or color, sitting at home on the couch, elbowing your husband, your wife, your kid, or smacking your son and going, that's you. It's identifiable. If you create something that is identifiable, so the people watching can go, that's my family. And you go, oh, your family's an African-American affluent family living in Brooklyn? No, but that's my family. That's my family. Your family's blue collar and the husband's a part-time construction worker? No, but that is my family. Same way with Tim Allen and Home Improvement. It's identifiable. So conceptually, people can identify, and you really do capture something that's truthful about their family. Personally, because my family blew apart, I was the oldest of 4 kids, in a tumultuous divorce when I was 15 years old. I didn't realize till years later, everything I was creating was to hold the family together, was to celebrate the family, to create on screen the family that I had lost. And I didn't realize that till many years later, and I went, oh, of course. I got to create the family that I wanted to be a part of as a kid.
Right. So even when you're older and you're an adult and you're creating these big shows, you still have that childhood innocence about you.
As a writer, as a creator, you draw on everything. Where you were born, where you grew up, the geography, the family dynamic, your friends, your education, your social status, all of that feeds, you on an unconscious level as well as a conscious level. So you bring that to the table. Roseanne was an extension of my working-class blue-collar family. All my uncles are independent contractors, and they were bricklayers and carpenters. The home that Roseanne lived in was my grandmother's house. I flew the production designer to Evansville, Indiana, to take pictures of my grandmother's house. The homes that were used, the exteriors of the homes that were used as a transition on Roseanne were all shot in my hometown of Evansville, Indiana. So I was drawing on everything I knew growing up in this blue-collar environment. And I did not want and never intended to condescend to these people or make fun of them. I was celebrating these working-class people because these are the people that I grew up with. And so you draw on that. You have to bring a little piece of yourself to this. If not, you're standing outside the project. And Cosby Show, in a weird way, taught me all of this. What Bill taught me was, in a successful show like that, the audience really does. They really do long to be a part of that family and sit on the couch with Theo and Keisha Knight Pulliam and Bill and Claire. They want to be a part of that.
You also worked on shows with Dan Aykroyd, Carol Burnett, and Dave Chappelle, which didn't work out long term. You got a couple of seasons out of each of them. Do you have any memories of working with those actors?
Oh, yeah. Especially Dave Chappelle, because this was before he became Dave Chappelle. But we rushed the development process on that. We were in a hurry. The studio was in a hurry. And when Barry Katz brought Dave Chappelle and originally Jim Brewer to us and said, we want to do a show around a black comedian and a white comedian who are best friends, we scrambled to get that pilot done. And I will take the full blame because if we had conceived it differently, I think that show would have had a shot. But we were in a hurry, and it's like building a house. If the foundation isn't solid, no matter how many times you change the windows, the shutters, the roof, it's going to be shaky. And I think we didn't really think through the premise of that show. Like Home Improvement, we talked about it, thought about it, met with Tim for almost a year before we wrote the pilot because we wanted to know what that show was about. I don't think we ever really cracked what the Chappelle Show was about. The Dan Aykroyd Show, Dan's obviously very talented. He's legendary. But again, when you have multiple shows in production, and I'm not making an excuse, it was my fault. We have multiple shows in production. You don't give full attention. And that show was probably too soft for Dan Aykroyd. It's a show that Disney really wanted to do, a minister with these kids. It was too soft. We should have found a different vehicle for him. But again, that was a show that we didn't conceive. It was one Disney pitched to us, and we took it and developed it. But I can't emphasize enough, when you have time to really think about what you want your show to do and what it's about, then you really create that foundation.
Are you someone that can easily distinguish between an actor and the character they play? For example, Bill Cosby is someone that changed the face of TV with his sitcom and how TV worked, and he was adamant in driving his show, but his reputation has since been tarnished in the public eye due to like, we know what's gone on with Bill Cosby. Tim Allen, I know, also had a colourful past before he got into comedy as well. And we mentioned Roseanne. Are you someone that can still sit back and admire their careers and shows as someone that works in TV and admire the character that they created?
Well, I can answer that in two ways. I have a hard time watching TV in general because it's got to be exceptional for me to give over to it, because watching TV is like going to work. And I'm going, why are they shooting it like that? How come that, so that part of my brain's working. It's not giving over. Two, I think despite personal problems or demons or whatever is happening in their personal life, there is this kind of impish child that lives inside all comedians. And that's what you really respond to. And there is something, I don't know, a persona that I can watch and separate from the person. I can do that. Because it's their essence, not necessarily their personality, especially when they're wrapped in a character in a sitcom and surrounded by other characters. I can separate and try and enjoy it. But like I said, my brain usually is analyzing and breaking down stories and asking production questions while I'm watching TV.
And I guess the best example that I can give of that is Robin Williams. Like, I've personally, as a fan and as someone that's watched and seen a lot of his work and seen him live, I've struggled since he died to watch any of his content. I've got his DVDs I've got a few of his DVDs, and I think it's because once I watch any more of his content, I know that's it. There's not going to be any more. And I guess that kind of feels like my mentality, and it's hard for me to kind of get into, I guess, kind of sit down and watch his content, because I know there's never going to be anything new. I'm never going to feel that I'm going to see something for the first time of his ever again. I guess that's how I feel. Do you get that feeling?
Yeah, I do. And the reality is, the lives of comedians, like musicians, artists, painters, sculptors, there is a peak. There is a peak period of creativity. They can continue to be creative, but you do peak at some point, and whether that's at 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, and then it diminishes it. And I think the healthy artists recognize that. You cannot stay number one year after year after year after year. You simply can't. And I think this is where artists can destroy themselves trying to stay at that peak. It doesn't mean acquiesce, give up. But look, I'm not ever going to create another Roseanne or Home Improvement, and I'm very comfortable with that. I'm continually creating. I'm writing stories every day, and I accept that. But I think if your only goal is to be back and be number one, you're going to drive yourself crazy or kill yourself, because you can't do it. It doesn't sustain.
And that's true. That happens more than you care to imagine in the music industry, in the comedy industry, in entertainment, and in, I guess, any other industry as well. But it's focused on when it's in the entertainment industry because it's worldwide news. Yes.
And I saw an interview with Elton John where he said, look, I know I peaked. I still will write music. And I think it was Elton John who made the comment. He thinks that is why Michael Jackson died, because he created and performed on the biggest selling album of all time, Thriller. and he was always trying to beat that. And I think that can happen in TV too, and again, I think the shows that I did that weren't working, I was in a hurry. I did not take the time to really embrace what is this show about? What is it saying about the human condition? And yes, it's a funny show, it's a sitcom, but if you don't do that foundational work and say, what do you want this series to do? How do you want the audience to respond to this? What do you want the audience to take away every week from this show? If you don't ask yourself that, then you're just writing jokes or you're just writing wacky scenes. What's the intent behind the story you're creating?
Let's move on to a movie that you co-wrote as well and made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars around the world in 2001. It's called What Women Want. In today's PC society, I almost guarantee there'd be some feminist group that would disapprove of this movie. Did everyone originally agree with the idea of Mel Gibson reading a woman's mind?
Well, originally, it wasn't developed for him. It went through a development process at the Disney Studios, and Nancy Myers came in and rewrote the Goldman Yupsa script, and when she was writing it, she said, I want one of two actors. I won't do this movie, or direct this movie, unless we get one of these two actors, Tom Hanks or Mel Gibson. And Mel read it, and within 24 hours said yes. So at the time, it was a hugely popular movie. It was somewhat dismissed by critics. Again, it goes back to our previous conversation. But yes, at the time, it was received very well. I think in today's world, with the politics of gender, I don't think it would be perceived as well.
Especially not with Mel Gibson at the helm.
It's still a funny
movie. It is, but especially not with Mel Gibson at the helm.
Well, again, that's where separating personal lives from the persona being portrayed. The movie holds up. It's still good. But the political atmosphere and Mel's history, of course, people will bring that baggage to the viewing.
What's next? You have your company, Wild Dance Productions. Do you think we can get another influx of multi-camera sitcoms with live studio audiences, or do you think that format's gradually dying out?
Well, everyone says that's what they want. My focus right now, personally, is writing plays. I've gone back to my first love. I'm finishing up my fourth play, and that gives me total creative freedom, and I'm enjoying it. I am loving the process. But as far as multicam sitcoms, everyone says they want them, and then they usually don't do them because they look old-fashioned. I know the mandate always comes down, we need multicam sitcoms. And as far as I know, and as far as I can tell, the only one doing it really well is Chuck Lorre on CBS. CBS does it really well with that whole string of multicam shows they've got. I also think this goes to the heart of writing. Writing a multicam show, I find, is more difficult than writing single cam. Because multicam, you have to sustain the scenes the way you do in a play. And I go back to what I said earlier. I never thought of it as a sitcom. I thought every week we're writing a one-act play. And writing for a multicam show and keeping it moving and keeping the pace and keeping the behavior and the jokes and everything going, it really takes craft. You have to have the craft to pull that off. I think you can cheat in single cam shows. You can pop over here for 2 lines and then pop over there. But to write an 8-page scene that has an arc, that has characters bumping against each other, and something changes in the course of the scene, and during those 8 pages, you have a lot of laughs, and it propels you into the next scene, that takes craft. And that's why early on, when I was staffing shows, I hired a lot of playwrights. I always mixed playwrights in with the TV writers. I got off on a tangent there, but your question is, multicam, yes, everyone wants multicam comedies. They're really difficult to pull off and do well. So that's why you don't see so many.
No, I want tangents. That's what makes me a good interviewer. The less I talk, the more my interviewee talks, the more people are going to enjoy it.
Okay.
Like you said, people don't tune into shows for the writers. People don't tune into my interviews for me. It's true.
Okay.
Is Last Man Standing multi-camera and live to studio? Sorry, not multi-camera. It is multi-camera. Is it live to studio audience?
I believe it is. I was not there for any of the tapings, but I believe it is. And all the shows we've been talking about were definitely audience shows, and we did 2 audiences a day, and I think it made all the difference in the performance energy, the laughs. A good comedian, as you know, when they get a laugh, they'll ride that wave, and they'll know to hold that line and just wait a moment, and the audience really does become another character in the piece. And for me, that was the most exciting part of the process because, again, it goes back to my training in theater. We work all week, and then we put this one-act play in front of this live audience, and we just happen to have 4 cameras between the audience and the performers. And that was the real joy when you hear 300 people belly laughing.
And that's why Tim Allen is one of my favourite comedy actors. He's kept that format alive. He did Home Improvement, and that was a classic. He's had a bit of a break, done a few movies, and then he's gone on to Last Man Standing, and he's kept that format alive, and he does it really well. And he's brought in his old mate Jay Leno as well a few times.
Yeah.
And finally, where can people find you? Do you do social media? And that's another amazing topic that I touch on with everyone that I interview, whether they're 30, whether they're 60, whether they're somewhere in the middle. They've all got a different opinion. Social media today is one of the tools that drives big sitcoms. You look at The Big Bang Theory, they're all on social media. They've all got millions of followers. You look at Orange is the New Black, they're all on social media. They've all got huge followings. Back in the 90s, for Home Improvement, for Seinfeld, for Friends, there was nothing like that. So how do you see social media? Do you see it as a tool, or do you see it as a bit of a hindrance? What's your opinion on it?
Well, I think it's a necessity now because there's so much product out there. And when I talk to students, I go, look, when I started in television, there were 3 networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC. There was this upstart called Fox, and there was this cable channel that showed movies without commercials, a thing called HBO. Okay? That's when I started on the Cosby Show. Now, arc that to today, Hulu, Amazon, you just go down the list, all the cable, all the networks.
Netflix.
There's so much product out there. How do you get through all that monkey chatter? How do you get through all that clutter? Social media is one way, and it is about niche audiences now. You're not going to have a show like Home Improvement where mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, and the kids all watch the same show. That just doesn't exist anymore. It's all niche programming. So social media is a necessity. Personally, I don't do it because I don't want my day interrupted. I want to put my focus on writing, but I know at some point, as these plays get produced around the country and the world, I'm going to have some social media presence. But personally, I don't do it because I find it a distraction. I would rather have my energy go onto the page, what I'm writing, as opposed to answering tweets or sending out tweets throughout the day. But I understand why these shows need social media.
Do you think back in the 90s, do you think social media would have been a good thing? Because those shows went for 8, 9, 10 years without social media. Today, these shows, they kind of need that social media to be able to go that long. Do you think social media would have been a good tool to have back then?
I don't think you would have needed it because the era you're talking about was appointment television. People made a point to be home on Thursday night to watch that show. And they didn't have it streaming. They didn't have it on their phone or their pad. They didn't have 1,000 other shows to choose from. So there was not the need for that. People knew when Cheers was on. People knew when Friends was on, or Home Improvement, or Roseanne, and they made a point to watch it. I understand now with, again, this swirl of shows that's floating around out there, why you have to break through with social media. And social media, in a strange way, forms a community the way a community used to be formed when the family used to all sit around the TV together. And so now you're not all sitting in the same room watching the show, but you are tweeting and talking about it as if you are in this, quote, ethereal or this electronic room. And you are creating a community with it, even though it is, you are disjointed from other people, you are sharing the show with them. So I don't know. I really have mixed feelings, and it's not. This isn't just an old codger talking. I just go, there's so many distractions in the world as it is, and so much chatter. I understand why people need it for their shows, but I'm not a big fan.
No, it's quite a common interpretation of social media. There are good things and bad things about it, and a lot of people say that they spend too much time on it and that they take everything that they see on social media relating to their show, relating to them personally, and that kind of annoys them. But that's what comes with it. It can be a tool, and it can be something that can be unhealthy if you rely on it too much. But yeah, everyone has a different opinion, and it's really interesting.
I think the reality is the shows that last are the ones where you want to spend time with the characters. That's the reality. You like these characters, you want to spend time with them, and whether that's an hour procedural or a half-hour comedy, you know they're going to solve the problem on network television by the end of the hour, and they're going to catch the bad guy. But you still watch it because you want to spend time with these characters. You like the characters.
Okay, so let's finish up on this. Let's finish up on this question I just thought up. What do you miss about Tim the Toolman Taylor? Or what's your favorite memory about Tim the Toolman Taylor?
What I miss most about doing Home Improvement, and especially Tim the Toolman Taylor, Tim, because he's a comedian, would go out of his way to make the cameraman laugh. He knew if he could crack up the crew in rehearsal, he had something really funny. Because these guys see him every day. They're down on the floor. They're behind their camera. They're lining up their shots. But Tim would go out of his way to find something that was really funny to make the crew laugh. And that was the greatest joy. Because when the cameramen are laughing so hard they can't keep the camera from wiggling, it creates community. It creates an atmosphere that is so positive and charged with goodwill, and you just want to be in that studio. And I remember Tim making the crew laugh so hard they have to stop rehearsal. That's what I miss. And then, of course, Tim would use that. Whatever he found in rehearsal with these guys, he would use in front of a live audience, and 99% of the time it just worked beautifully.
Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking me back through the days of 80s and 90s comedy. It's something I really am kind of annoyed that I missed out on, but I get to do this and I get to talk to all different kinds of people about that time and what made it special, and I kind of get to relive it, and you've really helped me with that today, and I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, well, thank you so much.